Everybody, welcome. I do want to invite everybody to turn on their webcams if they have one or if they are comfortable. Also, if you could, please keep yourself muted until we ask for any questions or the self-introductions at the end. All right. Thank you for joining us today for the Health and Human Services Committee virtual presentation. My name is Kirby Davis and I am the Membership Services Associate for the Chamber of Commerce of the Palm Beaches. Today we have Marcus Laws, Homeless Services Coordinator with the City of West Palm Beach. This meeting is being recorded, so please make sure your microphones are all muted if they are not already. Marcus, I will go ahead and hand the meeting over to you.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcus Laws, Homeless Services Coordinator for the City of West Palm Beach. I have a presentation for you. I'm hoping that it will be enlightening. I hope the information will be useful. And then if you guys have any questions at the end, I'd be glad to answer any questions that I'm able to. And we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, so we're going to be discussing homelessness, health, and wellness. And I'd like to approach the subject, I believe, just from a perspective of how I've come into the homeless world and how I continue to be a part of the homeless world, which is through outreach and engagement, providing services directly to those who are living on the streets. So when we look at outreach, it is a provision of health and community service-related information and services given to a targeted population that are traditionally underserved or uninsured. It's a strategy where we try and bring services to those who are living on the streets and to make sure that they have success by hiring those who have lived experience and those who are familiar with the community to be able to more effectively engage those who need our services. It is also one of those tools that we use to make sure that we are serving the community in the greatest capacity that's possible. When we look at outreach versus engagement, our engagement is actually our physical act of working with the client in an interactive fashion where we're working together to provide those services, to look at what barriers are consistently preventing stability within the community and within housing programs. And our success is always measured by how a client continues to remain engaged, if we have any positive outcomes, and how we choose to follow up with those successes and with interactions that we're having with the folks we've engaged. Now, outreach, like I said, it involves the delivery of services, education and raising awareness of our existing services, identification of underserved populations and referral to services, and filling in the gaps of services provided by mainstreams and offering governmental services. So when we say filling in the gap, we're looking at those areas where services are needed but not necessarily being provided. So we may have a housing project that will put someone in a safe place to live, but it may not necessarily teach them how to maintain housing on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So we look at how does our outreach inform and educate those we serve about what services are available once they are in housing so they maintain stability. Our engagement involves identifying the members of the target group in natural environments, meaning their neighborhoods, places that they grew up, places they feel comfortable and familiar. We're making contact, we're building relationships, and we're establishing rapport. And it's very important for us when we're conducting outreach that this engagement also comes along with it, because it may not happen the first time. It does take several attempts to build a relationship or to build trust that is sustainable. And especially when it comes to us talking about individuals being able to maintain housing, those relationships that we build oftentimes influences their ability to maintain housing. And it often involves how that person may be feeling, what they're involved in, what are their personality types, and if they feel safe. Sometimes that is the difficulty with outreach and with engagement, is they may not necessarily be trusting of myself as a worker when I first go out, and it takes a repeated exposure in order for them to build a level of comfortability, in order for us to build a relationship, and which they would allow me to help them to take action and to take control of their life. Now, our outreach and engagement is geared towards specified populations that may be experiencing homelessness. And there's a myriad of it. If you can, think about the differences that lie in between the general public, these are the same differences that we look at in the homeless population. So our gender differences, racial, sexual orientation, veteran status, whether it's a family or individual, youth or seniors, severely mentally ill, chronic substance abuse, HIV and AIDS, victims of domestic violence, unaccompanied youth, parenting youth, which is individuals ages 18 to 24 who have children who they're responsible for, and then the children of parenting youth. And when we look at each one of these specified populations, there are different ways to engage. There are different modalities that we would use to make sure that we're being effective in our engagement, as well as there will be different referral sources. So whereas I might take an individual and I may make a referral to our homeless resource center, the Lewis Center, the same may not be true for a family group. They may go to someone like Adopt a Family or Families First. So it really comes to whether or not we have the appropriate resources and that we're making the appropriate referrals based on the given population that we're dealing with at the time. So when we talk about populations of homelessness and we look at it at a broad view, we see that 17 out of every 10,000 people in the United States in 2019 were experiencing homeless on any given night. And it represents the cross-section of regions of the country, family status, gender, category, racial, and ethnic groups, along with other specified populations that we may be looking at. And we look at our populations that are significantly represented in the homeless community. So our national data tells us that individuals, males, and unsheltered are our largest populations of homeless people in America. So you have 70% of the people that were experiencing homeless were individuals who were living on their own or in the company or of another adult. And the other 30% were families with children. Most often we saw that they were males, with 60% of all people experiencing homelessness being male. And among those numbers, 70% were men and unaccompanied male youth. And then we look at our unsheltered population, where we have a group that included 200,000 people, or 37% of our overall population, that were among individuals that were experiencing homelessness. And we're looking at 1 and 2 being unsheltered. When you think about homelessness, I think most people usually look at homelessness as someone who is outside sleeping in uninhabitable conditions. But homelessness also does occur in other settings. But sometimes it's given to whether or not you have a system of natural supports. So a person may be experiencing homelessness, but they may have a family member or a friend who can take them in, and they may be sleeping on a couch. And those folks we would consider to be sheltered. versus those who are actually living on the streets on a continuous basis. When we look at these populations and how they are affected, we also look at those who are most at risk. And that risk can be considered by a number of factors. Most often, it's going to be risk of health and then risk of victimization. So with subpopulations, and we're looking at Pacific Islanders and Native Americans, they were tending to be experience homeless more often than other racial and ethnic groups, with 160 people experiencing homelessness out of 10,000 compared to the national average of 17 out of 10,000. And we look at those two particular groups because they are smaller racial and ethnic groups within the U.S. And it challenges us to look at if that type of disparity is present within a population that is traditionally considered one of the lower segments of minorities. Then you have Black Americans, multiracial Americans, and Hispanics who are similarly situated, who are still experiencing that type of disparity and that type of gap in housing on the national average versus white Americans and traditional majority racial and ethnic groups. So we look to prioritize our services when we begin to discuss the specialized populations and subpopulations of homelessness. And one of those specialized populations is one that I deal with most frequently, and that's chronically homeless individuals who are usually and more frequently than not disabled, have experienced long-term and or repeated episodes of homelessness. And they are considered to be 17% of the population. Veterans making up 7% of people who experience homelessness. And we prioritize them due to service to our country. And then we have unaccompanied youth who represent 6% of the population. And they are a vulnerable group consisting of those under 25 years old. Now, what we're starting to see a little bit more of is the increase in youth homelessness, but we're also starting to see a vast increase in senior homelessness, meaning those who are 65 and over returning to the streets after being housed for a period of time or experiencing new situations that have led to homelessness, most likely because they're on a fixed income and the prices of rent are being raised or housing is becoming unavailable to them and they end up on the street. It presents a significant concern to us because we look at the amount of folks who live on the street who may have pre-existing conditions or who are exposed and more likely to have a chronic medical condition. And COVID-19 has kind of highlighted this this health crisis that's associated with homelessness for us, finding that those who have pre-existing conditions are more at risk for COVID-19 deaths than those who don't have pre-existing conditions. So if we look at that from a scope of homelessness, we have a group of folks who are already predisposed to having high rates of chronic medical illnesses on top of other pre-existing conditions and other conditions such as living in inhabitable spaces that are now being exposed to a virus that puts them at higher risk of becoming seriously ill or death. So again, with our trends in homelessness and looking at things around our country compared to 2018 and 2019, our point in time count, which is our yearly count of homeless individuals currently living on the streets at any given point in time across the nation. There was a 3% increase from the 2019 point in time count, which marked the third straight year of national increase. And despite trends that were going down with the decrease in homelessness, we still saw that there were groups that were coming into homelessness that we had not seen before, again, with the youth and with the aging adults. With our special populations being prioritized in policy and in practice, we've been able to do some great things. So our veterans, their homelessness has decreased almost 50%, and other subpopulations have seen small reductions. But in our overall homeless scope, we still see that families account for 29%, chronic homeless individuals 9%, and people experiencing unsheltered homelessness at 10%. So while we are making those positive gains, what tends to happen is that we become focused on these given populations. And it's one thing that tends to happen with Health and Human Services is we become focused on a population, and while we're focused on that population and changes that need to happen, we tend to forget about those that are already still in play. And this leads to us narrowing our scope and narrowing our view, narrowing the way that we utilize our funding in order to support those who are most in need. And it's not that it's a bad thing, but it's one of those things that we truly have to look at, our levels of disparity within given populations, and then how it affects us as a whole when we're trying to, address homelessness at a macro level and not so much at a micro level. In Palm Beach County, our 2020 point in time count saw 480 persons sheltered. 361 were in emergency shelter, and 119 were in transitional housing. Our unsheltered count was 1,030 unsheltered people experiencing homelessness. 849 surveys were conducted, and 181 observations were conducted. So those are people who actually came out and spoke with someone working for a human services organization or governmental agency, and then our own observations for folks that we know or folks that we have seen on numerous occasions that seem to be experiencing homelessness. The highest number of unsheltered individuals they found in District 7 with 509, District 3 with 230, and District 4 with the third highest number of 106 unsheltered individuals. These areas actually do account for where we see the greatest number of homeless individuals, which were in West Palm Beach, in Lake Worth Beach, Delray, and Boca Raton. There were 110 unsheltered individuals counted at John Prince Park during the pit count. And as of 5/20/2020, the count was over 150. This count identified 1,510 homeless persons and families compared to 1,397 in 2019, which is an 8% increase. And this also includes that increase in seniors and decreases in homeless youth and veterans. So we can still see that even though we are making some progress, there are things that are happening in our systems and things that are happening in our community that still attribute to increases in homelessness. And I will not say that it's all systemic. Some of it is folks who have moved from other cities, other municipalities, other states who have found themselves in Palm Beach County and are taking residence here. So, there's things that we can look at that might be attributed to these increases, but they're increases nonetheless. And, we have to work to address those things as they come along to us. So I can't speak for any of the other municipalities and districts, but I can tell you from a small view here in West Palm Beach, things that attribute to our concentrated levels of homelessness. West Palm Beach is the county seat of Palm Beach County, and it is the largest city in Palm Beach County. The Philip D. Lewis Center, which is located at 1045th Street in West Palm Beach, is the singular homeless resource center for Palm Beach County, and it is the main entry point to obtain homeless services in Palm Beach County. So if we are having folks who are chronically homeless or who are looking for services, if they are looking to be served through traditional means, they will have to make contact with the Lewis Center, where they are placed into a coordinated entry system that allows us to see what barriers exist in them having stable housing, what barriers exist in them being provided services, and then working to overcome those barriers in tandem with finding housing and establishing social services that are needed for community-based living, such as healthcare and finances. West Palm Beach is also the site of the Department of Human and Veteran Services that provides and administers county initiatives to combat homelessness. We have a myriad of resources here in West Palm Beach. We have a lot of social service organizations, such as Vickers House, such as Dolores Place, who are community resource centers and advocacy agencies. That allow folks experiencing homelessness to have some contact out of the traditional means that may help be able to connect them with resources. We also look at the rising cost of living that may be incongruent with income within the city of West Palm Beach. And for some reason, it's a great place to panhandle. So we look at those things that introduce what seems as viability to those experiencing homelessness. If you have a great place to panhandle where you have a majority of your resources, this is where you're going to see a large concentration of folks because transportation becomes an issue. So if I am 10 miles away from the closest place that I can get some food and I don't have any money, I'm going to tend to stay closer to the places that I know have resources. That's going to allow me to obtain those resources with limited barriers in my way, and then an increased opportunity for success because I am closer to those resources. And then looking at our reasons for homelessness, our core causes can be very much different things, and it doesn't discriminate. It does and can happen to any and every one. Lack of affordable housing, divorce, lawful evictions and foreclosure, negative cash flows, unemployment, inadequate resources, physical and mental illness, natural and man-made disasters, physical disability, lack of family and natural supports, substance use, lack of needed services, gambling, and jail or prison and legal histories are just a few of those things that can come together to begin a person down the path to a homeless experience. But sleeping outside while you're homeless is not without a cause. Sometimes it is a choice. More often than not, it's due to a lack of choice. But there are folks that are rejected by the shelter, or they reject the shelter. In our case, there's a lack of space in the shelter. Right now, I believe the Lewis Center, if I'm not mistaken, has beds for 60 adults and 60 youth. So if you're looking at us having over 1,000 people who are in need of emergency shelter or who are in need of housing, those beds being prioritized is not going to help. It's not going to help close the gap of disparity that's available right now. Again, proximity to transportation to a shelter, lack of emergency shelters, community or systemic resistance to building shelter, lack of income, and then for some folks, it's the freedom of being outside and not having responsibility. So, and looking from a homeless perspective, what we know about those experiencing chronic homelessness, they're most likely to be males above the age of 40. They're going to experience chronic homelessness, which means they have a disability and they've been homeless multiple times, or they've been homeless one time but for an extended period. They're more likely to have experienced incarceration, more likely to be victims of violence, including sexual assault. They have a higher likelihood of brain injury, more likely to have unmanaged chronic diseases, more likely to experience advanced chronological aging. They have a higher propensity of schizophrenia, depression, and personality disorders. If they consume alcohol or drugs, their rate of non-palatable consumptions are higher, and palatable consumption exceeds the threshold. So either they're using more to get the same fix, or they're using more than what is recommended, just so they can try and deal with the complexities of living outside, or they're self-medicating to deal with mental health disorders. They have higher rates of trimorbidity, which means they have psychiatric disorder with substance use disorder, as well as chronic medical conditions. The leading cause of death is usually cardiovascular, cancer, or liver-related illnesses, and HIV. They more often have informal employment, so they'll be working at car washes, things that pay them under the table where they don't have to be responsible for paying taxes. And they have a high incidence of incidental, compounded, or exacerbated trauma. And we talk about these things because they all give credence to what exactly someone is dealing with when they're homeless. When you talk about schizophrenia, when you talk about depression and personality disorders, all come from differing levels of trauma, differing levels of life experience, differing levels of genetic predispositions, and all of these things compounded when you lack the resources to be stable in your daily living lead to the increased possibility that you remain in those circumstances, consequently due to things that you may be involved with, and consequently due to things that you have no control over. We specifically look at trauma when we're dealing with the homeless population, and I take it a step further in saying that the homeless experience is traumatic in itself. And the longer a person remains homeless, the more often they are impacted and influenced by traumatic events. So if we look at this cycle of what trauma actually does, it impacts your nervous system, and it begins what they call the fight, flight, freeze, or fright mode, meaning either you choose to fight back and you're able to come to grips and terms with the traumatic event. You run away from the traumatic event and you never really deal with it, or you become so frightened that you do everything that you can to avoid continuing to experience that traumatic event, or you isolate yourself so that you can protect yourself from anything that may even resemble a traumatic event. So when you're able to overcome what we see as trauma, you stabilize, you self-regulate, you grow. And your mental concept turns this situation into a neutral or positive meaning. And once that happens, a person is able to recover and regain stability physically and mentally, and their behavior becomes more stable, especially in the areas of physical, mental health, behavior, relationships, community, and spirituality. And then right below those same pillars of stability, you can see that when a person is not able to self-actualize and regulate, and they continuously experience a traumatic event, they're more likely to continue to experience traumatic events. And that causes continued declines and impacts of physical and mental health, increased risk of addiction, suicidal ideation and attempts, and hyperarousal. With their behavior does turn into self-harm. They have difficulty maintaining employment. Violence becomes a natural reaction, and they're more likely to be involved in crime. They have conflicts in interpersonal relationships, difficulty with building attachment, and issues with trust. So just going back real quick to our initial conversation with the outreach and engagement when we're looking at our relationships and a person who has constantly been traumatized. This is one of the reasons why it takes us several opportunities of building trust and building rapport with these individuals, is because they have already been subjected to relationships that have either broken down or relationships where they've been taken advantage of. So in order to build positivity and to build trust, and even introduce new services to individuals, it takes us being able to understand exactly what they may be going through, what they are currently going through, and things that may have happened in the past that influence their current outlook and their current decisions. We also look from a community aspect. It builds a lack of support. It builds isolation, difficulty receiving and seeking help, and homelessness. And from a spirituality aspect, it builds despair, a lack of hope, purpose, or meaning. And again, all of those things are psychological remnants of a traumatic event that impacts a person's ability to see and perceive what we may, do naturally on a daily basis, as being more so impossible, or something that they're going to have more difficult with achieving, because they don't have the wherewithal, because their mind is solely focused on avoiding the experience of trauma. So we approach from a trauma-informed care perspective, which is a perspective that assumes that everyone more than likely has a history of trauma. And we recognize that symptoms of trauma and the role that trauma plays in an individual's life impacts our ability to provide services and their ability to engage in services. We don't try and treat symptoms. We don't try and put them in situations where we're trying to account for things that have happened to them. We leave that to professionals to do that counseling, but we do recognize how it impacts their ability to trust us, and it impacts our ability to be effective in how we do. We try and make sure that as we're providing care and as we're providing services, that we're mindful of the fact that they may have experienced intense or low-level trauma. Again, viewing homelessness as a traumatic experience that happens on a continuous basis, it does continue to take a measured approach about how we go about talking to those who live on the streets and what services they're going to feel comfortable engaging with, and what type of personalities they're going to feel comfortable engaging with. We see re-traumatization as any situation or environment that resembles a traumatic event, either literally or symbolically. So again, with someone living on the streets and a traumatic event, them being on the street every day is a constant reminder and a constant re-traumatizing factor for them. We look at those who have been frequently re-traumatized as those who become more vulnerable, because as they begin to build on exacerbated trauma, these are the ones that experience a higher propensity for mental health disorders, and they're also the ones that historically we're going to have the toughest time housing, and they're going to be the ones that have the toughest time remaining in housing. Again, the experience of trauma that comes along with any additional factors such as chronic health disease or substance abuse integrates into our perspective additional factors that are going to be barriers to obtaining housing as well as sustaining housing. So for those individuals that are chronically homeless and those individuals that might be experiencing temporary homelessness, we look at our forms of assistance. So nationally, most common type is permanent supportive housing, which is 41% of the beds that have been attributed since 2007. And then we have rapid rehousing, which allows us to place individuals into housing who were previously homeless. And that has been 87% of an increase in how we utilize our forms of assistance and our fundings. These two, more so than not, have shown us the highest rates of potential growth and stability among the chronically homeless population. And it is due because there are support services that are associated with each program that provide the education that enhances stability once a person is moved from the streets into housing. We also look at transitional housing with 55% fewer beds in this category since 2007. And this shift is coming because we look at that permanent housing as more congruent to our purposes and aligning with us being able to actually end homelessness. And as we move forward, we'll get a chance to look over why exactly that is. So in America, our temporary housing over the last 5 years, we've seen emergency shelter, safe havens, and transitional housing decrease on a pretty steady level. And during our point in time counts, just one of the things that inform how we use our services. If we see a decrease in numbers during a point in time count, it leads to a decrease in funding for a certain area or certain subpopulation that we're dealing with in homelessness. And we tend to use that data as well as national and local data to inform how our systems are working, how our funding streams are working, and how we can more efficiently use what we have available to serve more folks. Unlike other states here in Florida, our winter months are still pretty warm, so we don't always use our emergency shelter that's available to us. But there is emergency shelter in case of things like hurricanes or natural disasters. And we see our temporary housing beds being decreased and a number of permanent housing beds being increased over the last couple of years. Again, we're looking at sustainability, and permanent housing tends to offer us more along the lines of sustainability and not seeing people return to homelessness. In West Palm Beach, we currently have permanent supportive housing, rental assistance programs, housing opportunities for people with AIDS, rapid rehousing for youth and adults, emergency solution grants that allow us to provide emergency shelter, transitional housing, sober living, housing choice vouchers, reentry housing, and emergency shelter. Permanent supportive housing is an indefinite duration. It allows rental assistance, case management to stabilize and increase income for each of the clients. It is one of our more intensive interventions, so you more often have someone that you're interacting with on a daily or weekly basis that is able to ensure that you're meeting your goals, that you're stable in housing, that any other needs that may be met for mental health or physical health are being met. And a provider will hold that lease and act as an intermediary landlord. What that provides is an opportunity for someone who may be removed from housing to avoid having an eviction on their record, which then becomes a barrier to housing in the future. Rental assistance program, tenants hold their lease and they find a housing unit. They get rental assistance they provide up to 30% of their income as rental. And there's some case management involved, but it is time-limited case management. Our transitional housing is supportive, temporary housing. And it's meant to bridge the gap from homelessness to permanent housing. It offers structure and supervision. It helps folks get connected to community resources for mental health addictions if they have that. They teach life skills and education and training for community living. Our housing for opportunities with people with AIDS are rental assistance programs that provide community residences, and it's for HIV positive individuals only. Rapid rehousing is 6 to 24 months in duration with rental assistance, case management to stabilize and increase income. It usually starts from a person being in shelter or emergency shelter, and then they move into their own apartment. And the lease does end up in their name. And then we have emergency solution grants which help to improve quality and quantity of emergency shelters for homeless persons, cover the costs of operating emergency shelters, fund essential programs, fund short-term rental assistance for homeless prevention, and then move homeless persons into permanent rental housing and assisting with outreach and engagement programs. Sober living is supportive, temporary housing focused on abstinence and support and substance use support. And it's bridging that gap of homelessness to permanent housing. Again, it's one of those things that you can consider also to be temporary because it does not move a person into permanent housing, but it's a conduit to build them to a point of sustainability where they can go into permanent housing. An emergency shelter are facilities with overnight accommodations for the primary purpose to shelter homeless in general or specific populations. Our reentry shelters are supportive temporary housing focused on community reintegration for those exiting incarceration. And our housing choice voucher, also known as Section 8, is a federal program that's designed to allow low-income individuals and families to meet their housing needs specified by location, accessibility, and school districts. So our system roles. When we started, we were talking about outreach engagement, and hopefully this will give you some insight into kind of how the engagement and outreach works. So from our street engagement and our shelter perspective, we assess clients, and they're referred to our coordinated entry process. We talk to them about the different programs that are available. We conduct assessments that inform us of what programs may be available to them or what programs they may qualify for. And then we have to gauge their interest. And then from there, we manage referrals. So if a client shows interest in permanent supportive housing, we begin the process of completing their VI SPDAT assessment, which is a vulnerability index, and allows us to see what challenges or barriers are currently being faced by a client that may prevent housing stability, and things that we can do on our end as providers to promote stability for this person. Our coordinated entry teams, they organize referrals in order of priority. Again, looking at those who have the highest risk of becoming in danger while they're living on the streets, or the highest risk of death while they're on the streets. And this is given into our continuum of care, which are housing providers from different organizations that administer programs such as permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing for clients who are deemed eligible. Once a client goes into these housing service providers, they're identified in order of priority. Most vulnerable accepted first, and we work with emergency shelter staff and street outreach staff to do what we call a warm handoff. And a warm handoff, what it looks like is I build a relationship with a person, they trust me, and now as they begin to work with a new set of individuals, I am doing my best to make sure that they're integrated into a new stream or service of care with as little bumps as possible. So I'll continue to follow their case. I'll continue to reach out to other agencies, speak with them on a consistent basis, making sure that the client's needs are met, following up with the client to see if they have any questions, any concerns, anything that may prevent them from continuing stability. We adhere to housing first practices, which means that we focus on providing housing first, and we provide wraparound services that promote community stability as we provide housing. And we only discharge our clients to positive housing destinations or transferring them to other housing providers, with the overall goal being that we don't return people to homelessness. So with permanent supportive housing, chronic homeless individuals, they have their SPDAT scores. If there's a family with disability, more services we assess based on each family individual, and we use that to build a score for the family as a whole. Okay, So moving forward, with all of these things set in place, we look at what services are needed in West Palm Beach, and this is from my perspective. It's not given to any other agency or person, but things that I've noticed as needs within the city. Integrated mental health services. We all remember the closing of Jerome Golden Center, which was an integral piece in our community that was providing consistent medication management and medication distribution for those experiencing mental health symptoms and illnesses. They also provided a myriad of daytime services that kept folks with mental health illnesses engaged, and primarily in our homeless population, that was one of our biggest things. Now, as we move towards trying to build more integrated mental health services, the city has built a partnership with Mental Health America to begin this process of providing on-street mental health services for those experiencing homelessness. And then we continue to have partnerships with local mental health agencies to provide care for those who were affected by the closure of Jerome Golden Center. We look at integrated education for housing and community living programs. So what that means is we're going to administer our programs, but we're also going to provide education for those who are taking part in those programs. That way we build them from a perspective where they know what their responsibilities are. They know how to take care of various things that they may not have continuous practice with, such as paying bills and contributing to the community, maintaining employment, and building educational opportunities for themselves and their families. We increase access to health and wellness opportunities, providing those in the community more knowledge about community-based health initiatives that are available to them, that are free to them, or that are within the range of cost availability. Economic empowerment programs for traditionally underserved communities. Equitable income and housing initiatives. I think these two are points that Mayor Keith James has been attempting to address with his 303 initiative to bring 300 units of affordable workforce housing into the West Palm Beach area. And then looking at our Peace in the Streets initiative, which is aimed at bringing services to lower economic and traditionally underserved communities in West Palm Beach to increase education and economic viability in those areas, as well as when we're looking at the Northwest Rise projects, doing those same things, building up the homes and the economy in these environments. That way we can build up those communities so we can decrease the gap in disparity between our own communities. Increased development of incentive programs for our developers and people coming into build in West Palm Beach, increased incentives for rental property owners to aid in closing that disparity gap with housing, enhanced prevention services. Again, going back to the education for housing and community living programs, making sure that if we are noticing a trend in folks who are continuously coming through the system and utilizing services, that we're actually providing education, or that we are integrating ourselves more heavily into their lives, make sure that we continue to look at what barriers are preventing them from stability and helping them to overcome those barriers. And then increasing low barrier systems for housing. And as a community, we need to look at creating affordable and habitable community-based housing designated to support low-income families and individuals. Providing education and opportunity to those experiencing homelessness. We need to view and treat the homeless experience as not only a social diaspora, but a healthcare crisis. We need to increase and improve our dialogue and action toward community integration, increase our education and employment opportunities, and improve care and housing accommodation for seniors. We can look at the things that are true in creating opportunities for self-resolving shelter, meaning that if we have most folks experiencing short-term homelessness, that we are geared in our shelters to build from that perspective and offer them opportunities so that either we divert them from entering into a service stream, or that they spend less time in the service stream than they need to. But our current limitations are, still present for us. And those limitations are the same things that we see that causes homelessness: a lack of affordable housing, negative cash flow, physical disability, substance use, jail, prison, and legal histories, and lack of needed services. We also have limitations in community education and community resistance, housing resources, mental health resources, and economic stability resources. So, and looking at how we fix that system, it really does have to start with how we integrate folks into our system. We need housing-focused sheltering, which means that as anytime we bring anyone into emergency shelter or we bring anyone into housing, we are focused on them not being dependent on our system, that we are empowering them to take control of their lives, and that we're supporting them by education and giving them the tools to do so. We changed the way that our staff interacts with folks who are experiencing homelessness. And we teach our staff about this self-integration, and we support them through education, through training, in order to provide education and training to those being served. When we look at these roles, we establish and we support our expectations. We say, this is your time limit, this is what we're going to do during your time limit, and we stick to those time limits. As we look at our goals and we look at how we can be more effective and efficient in what we're attempting to achieve, it's not only a responsibility to the client, it's also our responsibility to make sure that we're offering those services to make sure that folks are housed as quickly as possible and that they do not return to homelessness, because we have offered them the opportunity for education. And that's not to say that most people won't return to homelessness, or some won't return, but if we can build a system that is geared towards bridging those gaps, as it were, to make sure that these things don't occur, then we find ourselves challenged to bring about a change in the way that we tailor these programs and the way that we send our messaging out, which is the next thing that we have to do. Is we have to change our dialogue between the staff and the program users, and we have to change our dialogue within the community at large. And then we look at housing as healthcare. We look at the importance of housing for people with HIV and AIDS, how housing reduces hospital use among seniors, how supportive housing reduces spending for the homeless. In Portland, Oregon, there was supportive housing provided for 98 homeless and how healthcare utilizers, and they saw significant lower overall healthcare spending because these people who are now housed and connected to health resources have a lower propensity to reach out for emergency services. We have health systems that put up money to be able to do these things and launch initiatives aimed at housing and healthcare. And we utilize housing first, but not only housing. We have to remember that just because you put someone into housing does not change their mindset, and it does not change the things that perpetuate the homeless experience. What it does is it gives someone a safe space to be in while we look at those things and those barriers that cause them to continually return to homelessness or to utilize system services rather than finding stability of their own and within the community. When we look at the cost analysis for homeless at a national level, we see that our research shows us that housing someone in jail and hospitals or a shelter system compared to supportive housing has a spending on average about $40,000 to $50,000 more on the lower end, and about $100,000 more on the higher end for those who are unhoused. And the reasons those things happen, someone who's not housed is more likely to use emergency services, which means they're going to call an ambulance. So you have emergency personnel that responds with the ambulance. You also have police who have to respond to that call. So you already used two community-based systems that are going to increase the likelihood that your community is going to be spending in order to maintain stability. And that may be for a mental health call or it may be for a physical health call. But again, it involves multiple aspects of our community safety systems to support one or multiple individuals at any given time. We see permanent supportive housing as one of those things that helps us to reduce those spending because it does not have a time duration and it does allow for someone who has been experiencing chronic homelessness to achieve long-term housing stability while improving their health, improving their well-being, and being integrated back into the community. An example, I work with a gentleman, we'll call him Harper. He was a 45-year-old black man that spent 4 of the last 6 years living on the streets of West Palm Beach due to a breakdown in family support systems and economic stability and alcohol use. The psychological effects of the homeless experience saw him being repeatedly abused on the streets due to being frail, his alcohol use with increases in depression related to the loss of his family and isolation. He had several health scares due to being assaulted and having unsteady health care, meaning he would call the ambulance or would utilize police services. And there were serious concerns regarding his cognitive stability and his ability to live independently. In 2017, we had the introduction of service systems, which was our street engagement team. It took 6 months of continued engagement to gain trust and implement the services that were required for stability, including permanent supportive housing, implementation of harm reduction for his alcohol use, and the ability to have him tested for cognitive deficiencies. During this time, his cognitive ability increased and his health stabilized. In 2018, he was integrated into health services. He had insurance, he had stable housing, he had food stamps, and he was finding community stability through our housing program. In December 2018, he passed away under the care of the hospital. When he passed away, it was not on the street. It was with healthcare coverage and with housing set in place. And I say his is one of many cases that end with positivity, but his is one of many cases that can also not end if we don't seek to intervene and be involved when we have the opportunity to do so. And with that, I am finished.
All right, well, thank you, Marcus. It is almost 1 o'clock. I do want to make sure that we have time for questions, and then I do want to get some self-introductions in. So I'm going to bring us all back to the screen. So please feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions. I will start us off. Marcus, are there any volunteer opportunities for anybody that would like to or ways to get involved?
Most definitely. I would say first and foremost, reaching out to community advocacy agencies such as the Vickers House, the Lewis Center, the Lord's Place. They're always giving out opportunities and looking for volunteers to come in and be a part of the things they have going on. It's also a great opportunity to meet with those who are on the streets and begin building those relationships. Again, you know, as social service workers, we can do our part. But I think it means a little bit more when you have a community that is building around these individuals.
Okay, well, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Again, please feel free to unmute yourself. Mark?
Yes, I was just wondering how the census is going with the homeless population.
It's going. I would say it's probably a little hit or miss whether or not we have people that want to participate. Again, it's one of those things that happen as we reach out and we try and build relationships with folks. It may take a little bit for us to actually build those relationships, but we're constantly visiting the parks. We're constantly visiting social service organizations and having them also administer the census data and having them take part in making sure that we can record as many as possible and have them have their voice be heard in the census.
Cool.
WB Bates, I see you unmuted yourself. Did you have something? Oh, I see you're unmuted, but I can not hear you. I don't know if that's on my end. Can anybody else hear him? Nobody else can hear you either. Nope, I still cannot hear you. I don't know what is going on with that. Can you type your question into the chat box and we'll come back to you? And then also type in your information, because we are going to do self-introductions real quick. Does anybody else have any questions before we start? And it is 1 o'clock, so I understand time is valuable, so jump off if you need to. We are going to introduce ourselves.
Yeah, Marcus, this is Steve. Great presentation. Very a lot of information. Question about the temporary homeless shelter they're putting over there at the South Florida Fairgrounds. How is that going to affect? And and do you see the population from John Prince Park wanting to relocate out that way? Typically, they kind of like to stay in the same areas you said, close to where the transportation is located and things like that.
Uh-huh. Um, I, I see it being a great thing. One of the challenges that we've had to overcome has really been selling it to them. I think because it's they see it as a former detention center. They get the wrong impression because there were barbed wires and fences up when it first came in. But we're starting to get a warmer reception. Kind of the way things have been going is that they've looked at seniors, they looked at veterans, and they've looked at the folks living in John Prince Park. And they've begun to start a triage system where they take them to a hotel for quarantine to make sure that no one is positive with COVID. And during that time, they're establishing case management, they're establishing resources that will be needed. So once they make the transition into the annex building down at the fairgrounds, that they're more stabilized, and then they have a greater chance of integrating into that system. So I think it's going to be a positive thing, but we'll have to see, kind of how it goes and how comfortable people are becoming. I think the more we can get folks integrated into that system and allow them to see that it's a non-confrontational, low barrier type of environment, that they'll be more apt to go into it.
All right. So I got a few chats in the box. Let me read through those. Okay, so we have any data on if the homeless are being sent from other cities as a way to reduce homelessness in that particular city? And that's from WB Bates II.
Yes, we are. We actually are sharing data. I think most recently we were in contact with some folks from Panama City to talk about ways that they were handling their homeless population and things that they could do to integrate services more frequently into their community activities. And that's one of the things that we kind of have to continue to do. I know that we're talking and partnering with Delray Beach and their police department on ways to integrate mental health services there. And then also reaching out to other municipalities within Palm Beach County, such as Lake Worth Beach and Boynton Beach, to discuss what community services may be needed there and how their community services in those municipalities can actually support what's going on in Greater Palm Beach County and how it affects West Palm Beach as a whole.
All right. I think that is all the questions that I have in the chat. Let's go ahead and start some self-introduction since we are over on time. I will start with Ezra. You've been quiet. Let's have you chat. Can you turn on your microphone for us?
So unusual that I'm quiet.
It is.
I'm Ezra Krieg. I'm Director of Housing Initiatives for Gulfstream Goodwill Industries. We operate both the Lewis Center and the Annex that is providing emergency shelter for folks, and we're managing the transition from John Prince Park to the annex right now. Really appreciate your presentation, Marcus. You know, it takes a village to solve this problem, so there's lots of folks that got to work together to make this work. I just need to make 2 points. One is, somebody mentioned the census is so important because the census ultimately helps us fund all the stuff we're doing. Palm Beach County is behind the state and national average for response to the census. That's going to hurt us to be able to help solve the homelessness problem in our community. So all of us have got to work together. And now that they've shortened the deadline to September 30th, we got a lot of work to do to get people signed up. I know I live in Delray. We're doing a lot of stuff and trying to count the folks on the streets, get them into the census and other populations that may not be participating. So it's my little commercial for the day.
All right, thanks, Ezra. I'm going to go ahead and go to Bob Quittner. Are you able to unmute yourself, Bob?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Bob.
Okay, you can all hear me. Yes. It was very interesting. I learned a lot. I haven't had to listen to that interesting stuff for a long time, but it's great what we're doing. So that's about all I can say. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks,
And
Bob.
I represent Broward Factory Service, and we keep you cool. And I'm an ambassador to the chamber. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Joan.
My name is Joan Quittner, and I am with Legal Shield and ID Shield. We offer affordable access to the judicial system for families, businesses, individuals, and identity theft protection and compensation if you become a victim. Very, very important. Also give very good advice on the COVID-19. I'm an ambassador with the chamber. I've been one for 11 years. Your talk was extremely interesting, and it's a real problem, and it's a very sad problem. So I'm glad that people are doing something to help these people. Joan Quittner, Legal Shield and ID Shield. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. All right, I'm going to introduce W.B. Bates II, and I hope I'm saying that as it is supposed to be. He is the campus director for Renaissance Health Institute in West Palm Beach. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, so I'm not sure who this is. It's E95482. I think it's Lisa. Lisa, are you able to unmute yourself? All right, we will come back. Steve.
Yeah, Steve Simmers with Seacoast Bank. I'm also an ambassador, and like I said, Marcus, great presentation, a lot of information. Love to maybe get with you on the side with being able to offer somewhere of a financial education to the homeless population as you're helping them transition back in and helping them with their financial and, you know, possibly help showing them what it does to establish a new checking account and whatnot for them, if that's something you're interested in. But we're always looking to partner within the community. We have been around for 90 years in Florida, Florida-based bank. Thank you.
All right, great, Steve. And then Mike.
Hey, you can hear me?
Yes.
Hey, just wanted to say thanks again for having me. And Marcus, that was a great presentation. Definitely appreciate you taking the time to put that together and just educating us and letting us know more about what's going on. It's obviously a huge impact that we all see in our community, and we want to do everything we can to address that. I work at a substance abuse treatment center just right down the street from Jerome Golden. So it's called the Mondale Healing Center. And if you ever want to come out and check it out, you know, we definitely would love to have you and see what we can do to partner together, because ultimately that's what this is about. Like I know Steve just said, you know, doing some financial assistance with helping people, being able to plan for money. Maybe that's something that we can work at and organize on our campus. We have a giant auditorium, so might be a good place to go ahead and get that together and work on something like that.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today, Mike. All right, we have one more person that I'm not sure who it is, LGK30. Okay, it's hello, my name is Kimberly Harris. I am the intake specialist with Vocational Rehabilitation. We help clients that have impairment or disabilities to get job and maintain their jobs. We start at the age of 14 years old. All right, well, thank you for joining us today, Kimberly. And I know we ran over time. I am so sorry. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much, Marcus. That was a wonderful presentation. I will
Thank you.
send everybody your information. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Our next meeting is on September 8th at 12 p.m. I'll see y'all then.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Thank you, guys.